I'm Marcus Sterling, 47 years old, and until 3 weeks ago, I thought my $220 million fortune was the biggest target on my back. I was wrong. The real threat was sleeping in the guest bedroom, organizing my schedule, and slowly killing me with a smile. My personal assistant of 5 years, Elena, had been replacing my heart medication with arsenic. The woman I trusted with my life was literally taking it away, one pill at a time. The headaches, the fatigue, the mysterious illnesses that baffled my doctors, it all made sense when the lab results came back. But here's what Elena didn't know. I've built empires by staying 3 steps ahead of everyone. And now that I know her game, it's time to play mine. What happens when a billionaire discovers his most trusted employee is his would murderer? Like and subscribe if you've ever faced the ultimate betrayal. It started with the headaches, sharp, stabbing pains that would hit me without warning, usually in the middle of important board meetings or client calls. At first I chalked it up to stress. Running a multi-billion-dollar investment firm isn't exactly a low-pressured job. But then came the fatigue, bone-deep exhaustion that no amount of sleep could cure. Elena noticed before I did. She'd been my personal assistant for 5 years, managing everything from my schedule to my household staff with military precision. When I started canceling evening meetings and leaving the office early, she was the one who suggested I see Dr. Richardson, my longtime physician. "Mr. Sterling, you look pale," she said one Tuesday morning, her concerned voice cutting through my mental fog as I stared blankly at quarterly reports. "Perhaps you should have that checkup you've been postponing." I remember thinking how thoughtful she was, how lucky I was to have someone who cared about my well-being. Elena had always been more than just an assistant. She was the person who remembered my mother's birthday, who made sure I ate when I was buried in work, who organized my entire life so seamlessly that I barely had to think about anything outside of business. The blood test was routine. Dr. Richardson drew several vials, muttering about checking everything from vitamin levels to liver function. I expected nothing more than a lecture about working too much and eating too little. What I got instead was a phone call that changed everything. "Marcus, I need you to come in immediately." Dr. Richardson's voice was tight with something I'd never heard from him before. "Don't drive yourself. Have someone bring you." Elena drove me to the appointment, her hand steady on the wheel while mine shook uncontrollably. She waited in the reception area, flipping through magazines with the calm composure I'd always admired. Meanwhile, in Dr. Richardson's office, my world collapsed. "Arsenic poisoning," he said, sliding the lab report across his desk. The numbers meant nothing to me, but his grave expression said everything. "Chronic exposure over several months, possibly longer. Marcus, someone has been poisoning you." The words hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. Arsenic, poison. Someone was trying to kill me. My mind raced through possibilities: business rivals, disgruntled employees, anyone who might benefit from my death. But then Dr. Richardson said something that made my blood freeze. "The levels suggest daily exposure. This isn't random or accidental. Someone with regular access to your food or medication has been administering this systematically." That's when I thought about Elena. Elena, who prepared my morning medications every day, laying them out in a small silver dish next to my coffee. Elena, who had access to everything: my home, my office, my most private moments. Elena, who had been so concerned about my health that she'd insisted I see the doctor. The irony wasn't lost on me. The person who'd saved my life by pushing for the medical appointment might be the same person who'd been trying to end it. The drive home from Dr. Richardson's office was torture. Elena chatted cheerfully about dinner plans and tomorrow's schedule, while I sat in the passenger seat, studying her profile with new eyes. Was this the face of someone who'd been slowly killing me? Her perfectly applied makeup, her neat blonde hair, pulled back in its usual professional bun. The way she hummed softly to the radio, everything that had once seemed comforting now felt sinister. "You're quiet," she observed, glancing at me with what looked like genuine concern. "Bad news from the doctor?" I forced a smile. "Just need to adjust some medications. Nothing serious." That night, I locked myself in my home office and began digging into Elena's background with the same methodical approach I used for high-stakes investments. What I found made my skin crawl. Elena Martinez, or so she'd told me, had provided 3 professional references when I hired her 5 years ago. I called the first number, expecting to reach her previous employer, a tech executive in San Francisco. Instead, I got a disconnected line. The second reference led to a small business that had closed 4 years ago, according to public records. The third was more disturbing. The phone number belonged to a burner phone company. I pulled her employment file from my personal safe. Her resume listed a degree from UCLA, and extensive experience with high-net-worth individuals. But when I accessed the university's alumni database through my connections on the board, there was no record of Elena Martinez ever attending UCLA, no record of her existence at all. My hands trembled as I opened my laptop and began searching deeper. Professional investigators cost money, but I had plenty of that. What I needed were answers, and I needed them fast. Every moment Elena remained in my house, every meal she prepared, every pill she handed me, could be another step toward my grave. Preliminary background check I commissioned revealed Elena's real identity within 48 hours. Her name was actually Elena Vasquez, and she had a criminal record spanning 3 states. Identity theft, fraud, and most chilling of all, she'd been a person of interest in the death of her previous employer. A wealthy widow in Phoenix Hood died from mysterious complications related to her heart medication. The case had never gone to trial. Insufficient evidence, the report stated. But the pattern was there, clear as daylight to anyone willing to look. Elena targeted wealthy, isolated individuals who relied heavily on personal assistance. She gained their trust, accessed their medical routines, and then she helped them die. The more I read, the more I realized how perfectly I'd fit her victim profile. A successful businessman with no family, no close personal relationships. Someone who worked long hours and relied entirely on his assistant to manage his personal life. I was exactly the type of man who could disappear gradually, whose decline could be attributed to stress and overwork until it was too late. But there was something Elena hadn't counted on. In all her research into my background, she'd missed one crucial detail about Marcus Sterling. I didn't get where I am by being passive. I built my fortune by identifying threats before they destroyed me, and now that I knew what Elena was, I was going to make sure she never got the chance to finish what she'd started. The question wasn't whether Elena was trying to kill me anymore. The evidence was overwhelming. The real question was how long she'd been planning this, how deep her deception went, and most importantly, what was I going to do about it? As I stared at her fake credentials spread across my desk, one thing became crystal clear. If Elena thought she could murder Marcus Sterling and walk away with his fortune, she was about to learn why I'd never lost a fight that mattered. ***, sitting in my office at 3 in the morning, surrounded by evidence of Elena's deception, I forced myself to remember the beginning. How had I been so blind? How had someone so dangerous slipped past every security measure I'd put in place? The answer was simple and humiliating. Elena had been exactly what I needed when I needed it most. 5 years ago, I was drowning. My previous assistant had quit without notice after my demanding schedule proved too much for her family life. I was juggling 3 major acquisitions, a hostile takeover attempt against one of my companies. In the aftermath of my mother's death, the only family member I'd truly been close to, I needed someone who could step in immediately, handle pressure, and manage the chaos of my life with zero learning curve. Elena's interview had been flawless. She'd walked into my office wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit, carrying a leather portfolio that contained detailed analyses of my business interests, my previous assistant's duties, and a proposed optimization plan for my daily schedule. While other candidates stumbled through basic questions about calendar management, Elena discussed complex investment strategies and demonstrated an understanding of my work that impressed even me. "Mr. Sterling," she'd said, her voice confident, but respectful, "I don't just manage schedules. I manage lives. Your success depends on more than just business acumen. It requires the freedom to focus on what you do best while someone else handles everything else." She'd been right, and she'd proven it from day one. Elena didn't just organize my calendar. She anticipated my needs before I voiced them. She'd have my preferred coffee waiting when I arrived at the office, would reschedule conflicting meetings before I even realized they conflicted, and somehow always knew when I needed space to think, versus when I needed her input on a decision. Within 6 months, she'd become indispensable. She managed my household staff, coordinated with my accountants and lawyers, even handled personal shopping and gift. When board members called my office, they often spoke directly with Elena, trusting her to convey messages accurately and prioritize urgent matters. The red flags were there, but I'd interpreted them as signs of exceptional dedication. Elena worked longer hours than any assistant I'd ever had. She volunteered for additional responsibilities. She seemed to have no personal life outside of serving my needs, which I'd attributed to professional ambition rather than predatory behavior. Most tellingly, she'd gradually isolated me from potential romantic relationships. Whenever I showed interest in someone, Elena would discover scheduling conflicts that made dating difficult. She'd research the women I was interested in and present me with detailed reports on their backgrounds, reports that somehow always revealed concerning information that made me reconsider pursuing the relationship. "I just want to protect you from gold diggers," she'd say, her concern seeming genuine. "Someone with your wealth has to be careful about people's motives." The irony was staggering. While I'd been worried about women who might want my money, I'd given complete access to someone who wanted my life. Elena had also positioned herself as my medical advocate. She'd researched my family history of heart disease and suggested I start taking preventive medications. She'd found Dr. Richardson, vetted him thoroughly, and even attended some of my appointments to take notes about his recommendations. My blood pressure medication needed adjusting. Elena was the one who picked up prescriptions and made sure I took them consistently. Looking back, I could see how masterfully she'd orchestrated every aspect of the plan. She'd made herself so essential to my daily functioning that questioning her felt like questioning my own judgment. She'd created a dynamic where I depended on her completely while she gradually gained access to every aspect of my life that could be used to destroy me. The employment contract I'd signed with her 5 years ago sat on my desk like evidence in a murder trial. In my eagerness to secure her services, I'd given her responsibilities that no assistant should have: access to my personal bank accounts for household expenses, authorization to make medical appointments and handle health insurance claims, even power of attorney for certain business matters. When I traveled, I'd handed a serial killer the keys to my kingdom and thanked her for her service. But Elena had made one crucial mistake in her 5-year campaign to murder me. She'd given me just enough time to figure out her game before she could finish it. ***. Elena's daily scheduled book was a masterpiece of organization and manipulation. As I flipped through its pages in the early morning hours, I realized I was looking at the blueprint of my own destruction, meticulously planned and executed with the precision of a Swiss watch. Every entry was written in her neat handwriting, color-coded in blue ink for business appointments, green for personal matters, red for medical appointments. But it was the patterns that made my blood run cold. How she'd gradually increased the frequency of my medical visits, how she'd scheduled them strategically, around stressful business periods when my symptoms would be most pronounced, how she'd documented every detail of my declining health with the thoroughness of a research scientist. Tuesday, March 15th, MS, complaining of headaches again, suggested he take extra pain medication, picked up new prescription from Dr. Richardson. Note: patient seems more susceptible to symptoms during merger discussions. Friday, April 2nd, MS very fatigued during board meeting, asked me to reschedule afternoon appointments, prepared evening medications with dinner, observed increased tremor in hands. Monday, April 18th, MS nearly fainted during client presentation, insisted on calling doctor immediately. Note: symptoms accelerating as planned. The clinical detachment of her observations was terrifying. She'd been documenting my death in real time, treating my suffering like data points in an experiment. But what disturbed me most was how she'd used her apparent concern for my well-being to mask her true intentions. Elena had been the perfect assistant in every way that mattered to someone planning a murder. She'd established herself as my primary caregiver, the person everyone, including medical professionals, looked to for information about my health and habits. When Dr. Richardson had questions about my symptoms, he'd often call Elena directly, knowing she kept meticulous records of everything. She'd also created a paper trail that would support her narrative if questioned. Her schedule book documented every instance of her encouraging me to seek medical attention, every time she'd worried about my health, every occasion when she'd gone above and beyond to care for me. To any outside observer, Elena looked like a devoted employee who'd done everything possible to help her employer, not someone orchestrating his demise. The medication routine she'd established was particularly ingenious. Every morning, Elena would prepare my pills in a small silver tray. Heart medication, vitamins, supplements she claimed would boost my energy and immune system. She'd present them with my coffee and the daily briefing, making it part of our established routine. The pills looked identical to what Dr. Richardson had prescribed, but I now knew that Elena had been substituting them with carefully measured doses of arsenic. She'd even convinced me to switch to a pill organizer for convenience, claiming it would help me remember my medications when I traveled. The organizer sat on my nightstand, filled weekly by Elena's careful hands. Looking at it now, I realized it had been my death sentence, portioned out 7 days at a time. But Elena's perfectionism had also created her downfall. Her obsessive record-keeping, which she'd intended as protection, had become evidence of premeditation. Her detailed observations of my symptoms proved she'd been monitoring the effects of her poisoning. Her careful documentation of my medical appointments showed she'd been manipulating my healthcare to avoid detection. Most damaging of all, her schedule book revealed the timeline of her plan. I could trace the exact moment when my random symptoms had begun correlating perfectly with changes in my medication routine that she'd implemented. The pattern was so clear that even a first-year medical student could see what had been happening. Elena had been brilliant, methodical, and patient. She'd played a 5-year game with the skill of a grandmaster, positioning herself perfectly to commit the perfect crime. But in her arrogance, she'd forgotten that the best way to avoid detection isn't to create fake evidence of innocence, it's to leave no evidence at all. As I photographed every page of her schedule book, I felt a grim satisfaction. Elena thought she'd been documenting her success, but what she'd actually done was compile a comprehensive confession. Every entry, every observation, every careful notation was proof of her guilt. The woman who'd been the perfect assistant had just provided me with the perfect evidence to destroy her. The private investigator I hired worked fast. Within 7 hours, James Morrison had compiled a financial profile of Elena Vasquez that revealed the desperate woman hiding behind the perfect assistant facade. What he discovered made the poisoning attempt not just personal, but pathetically predictable. Elena was drowning in debt. Credit cards maxed out to nearly $80,000, a second mortgage on a condo she couldn't afford, and most shocking of all, gambling debts, totaling over $200,000, to some very dangerous people in Las Vegas. The monthly payment plan she'd arranged with her creditors required $8,000 per month, more than double her salary as my assistant. She's been living on borrowed time, Morrison explained, sliding financial records across my desk. The credit card companies have started legal proceedings. Her mortgage is 3 months behind, and according to my contacts in Vegas, her gambling debt holders aren't the type to accept late payments indefinitely. But the truly damning evidence came next. Morrison had found a life insurance policy that Elena had convinced me to sign 18 months ago. She'd presented it as a standard employment benefit, explaining that successful executives often provided life insurance for key employees as a retention tool. The policy was for $5 million, with Elena listed as the primary beneficiary. I remembered signing the documents. Elena had scheduled the insurance agent to come to my office during a particularly busy week when I was distracted by a major acquisition. She'd assured me it was a routine employment benefit and that my lawyers had already reviewed the paperwork. I'd signed without reading the details, trusting her judgment as I'd done countless times before. The timing is interesting, Morrison noted, pointing to dates on the insurance documents. She arranged this policy 6 months after her gambling debts reached critical levels. 3 months later, your health problems began. The pattern was crystal clear. Elena had found herself in a financial hole too deep to climb out of legitimately. She'd identified me as her solutional, wealthy employer with no family, no close relationships, and complete trust in her abilities. The life insurance policy had been her exit strategy, guaranteeing that my death would solve all her financial problems with money to spare. Morrison had also discovered Elena's gambling addiction. Through casino surveillance footage and financial records, she'd been a regular at high-stakes poker games and blackjack tables, often losing thousands of dollars in single nights. The addiction had escalated over the past 2 years, coinciding with her increased access to my personal accounts for household expenses. She's been skimming, Morrison revealed, showing me doctored expense reports. Small amounts, carefully hidden in legitimate household costs. Probably $2,000 to $3,000 per month for the past 18 months. Not enough to solve her problems, but enough to keep her gambling habit fed while she planned something bigger. The theft made sense now. Elena had been using my money to feed her addiction while simultaneously planning my murder. Every dollar she'd stolen had probably gone directly to the poker tables, making her debt situation worse and increasing her desperation to execute her ultimate plan. But there was more. Morrison's investigation had uncovered communications between Elena and a man named Victor Reyes, a small-time criminal who specialized in document forgery. They'd been exchanging messages about employment, verification, and reference creation clearly related to her fake background. But more recently, their conversations had turned to something else entirely. She's been asking about ways to accelerate timeline, Morrison read from printed text messages, wants to know about increasing dosage safely, and avoiding detection during final phase. This woman isn't just poisoning you, Mr. Sterling. She's planning to finish the job soon. The financial pressure explained everything. Elena couldn't afford to continue the slow poisoning indefinitely. Her creditors were closing in, and her gambling debts were accumulating interest daily. She needed me dead within months, not years, which meant she was about to become far more dangerous. As I stared at the evidence of Elena's desperate financial situation, I realized I was looking at a woman with absolutely nothing to lose. She'd already committed multiple felonies: identity theft, fraud, attempted murder. Her only remaining option was to complete her plan and disappear with the insurance money, or face bankruptcy, criminal prosecution, and quite possibly worse consequences. From her gambling debt holders, Elena hadn't chosen to kill me out of malice or hatred. She'd chosen to murder me because I represented $5 million worth of financial salvation. And in her desperate mind, my life was a small price to pay for her freedom. The cold calculation of it was almost more disturbing than if she'd acted from passion or revenge. The discovery of the forged will was what transformed my suspicion into absolute certainty. Morrison had gained access to Elena's apartment through a contact in building maintenance, and what he'd found there was a complete blueprint for stealing my entire fortune. Hidden in a false bottom of her bedroom dresser were documents that would have made a seasoned con artist proud. Elena had spent months creating an elaborate forgery of my last will and testament, complete with fake notarizations, witness signatures, and legal language sophisticated enough to fool a cursory examination. According to her version of my will, I had left Elena $50 million outright, plus control of a trust fund worth another $100 million. The document claimed I had recognized her exceptional loyalty and dedication, and wanted to ensure she was financially secure for life. Most ingeniously, the fake will included a clause stating that I had lost faith in distant relatives and business associates and preferred to leave my fortune to someone who had truly cared for my well-being. She's thought of everything, Morrison said, photographing the documents with a high-resolution camera. Look at this witness signature. It's a perfect forgery of your lawyer's handwriting. She must have practiced for months to get it this accurate. But the forged will was just part of a larger scheme. Elena had also created fraudulent powers of attorney, medical directives, and even correspondence between fake lawyers discussing the estate planning process. She'd built an entire paper trail that would support her claim to my fortune, complete with backdated documents and false communications. The most disturbing aspect was how she'd planned to use the documents. According to Morrison's analysis, Elena intended to discover my death and immediately present the will to my lawyers and accountants. The life insurance policy would provide immediate funds, while the forged will would give her access to my much larger estate within months. She's even prepared explanations for why the will was never filed with your lawyers, Morrison explained, showing me a fake letter supposedly from me. This document claims you wanted to keep your estate planning private and had instructed her to only reveal the will after your death. It's amateur hour legally, but it might buy her enough time to access accounts and transfer funds before anyone looks too closely. Elena had also researched my actual estate planning extensively. She'd somehow gained access to my real will, which left the majority of my fortune to various charities and educational institutions. Her forgery was designed to look like a recent update that superseded the previous version, with language claiming I had reconsidered my legacy and decided to reward those who had shown me genuine care. The psychological manipulation embedded in the fake will was particularly clever. Elena knew that anyone who knew me would understand that I valued loyalty above almost everything else. The language about rewarding genuine care and losing faith in business associates would ring true to people familiar with my personality and past disappointments, but Elena had made one crucial error in her planning. In her eagerness to maximize her inheritance, she'd gotten greedy. Leaving herself $150 million would have raised immediate suspicions, no matter how well crafted the forgery. A truly smart criminal would have left herself a smaller amount, maybe $5 or $10 million, that would have seemed reasonable, as a generous gift to a long-term employee. Morrison had also discovered Elena's exit strategy. She'd already applied for passports under multiple identities and had researched countries with limited extradition agreements with the United States. Her plan was to claim my estate, liquidate assets as quickly as possible, and disappear to South America with enough money to live comfortably for the rest of her life. The woman's not stupid, Morrison admitted grudgingly. If she'd been patient and less greedy, this plan might have actually worked. Most people don't investigate their assistants' backgrounds this thoroughly, and most doctors don't test for arsenic poisoning unless they have a specific reason to suspect it. As I examined the forged documents, I felt a mixture of rage and admiration. Elena had spent years planning every detail of this scheme, anticipating problems and creating solutions with remarkable foresight. She'd understood that stealing my fortune would require more than just killing me. She'd need to establish a legal claim to my assets that would survive scrutiny long enough for her to escape. But in creating such an elaborate forgery, Elena had provided me with irrefutable proof of premeditation. These weren't the actions of someone who'd acted on impulse or in a moment of desperation. This was evidence of a calculated, long-term plan to commit murder for financial gain. The woman who'd been preparing my death for 5 years had just handed me the evidence I needed to prepare her destruction. Asterisk. The security footage was the smoking gun I needed. My mansion had been equipped with a comprehensive surveillance system for years, but I'd never thought to review the cameras in my own bedroom and private areas. Elena had counted on my trust and assumption that she'd never violate my privacy. She'd been wrong on both counts. Morrison and I spent an entire night reviewing months of archived footage, focusing on the morning routine where Elena prepared my medications. What we discovered was a masterclass in calculated murder, captured in high-definition detail. The earliest footage showed Elena performing her duties exactly as I remembered, carefully organizing my pills in the silver tray, labels, and arranging everything with professional precision. But starting 18 months ago, her behavior had changed in subtle ways that became obvious once we knew what to look for. Watch her hands, Morrison pointed out, replaying a sequence from 6 months ago. See how she palms something from her jacket pocket before touching your heart medication. And look at her body language. She's deliberately positioning herself to block the camera's view of the pills. The footage showed Elena's technique evolving over time. Initially, she'd been nervous and clumsy, occasionally dropping pills or fumbling with containers. But as weeks passed, her movements became smoother and more confident. She'd developed a routine for the substitution that was nearly invisible unless you knew exactly what to watch for. Most damning was her demeanor during the process. While preparing my legitimate medications, Elena appeared professional but routine. During the substitution process, her expression was completely different, focused, intense, and disturbingly satisfied. The camera captured micro-expressions that revealed her true feelings, pleasure at successfully executing each step of my murder. This is the best evidence we could possibly hope for, Morrison said, bookmarking particularly clear sequences. Any jury in the world would convict based on this footage alone. But the security cameras had captured more than just the poisoning itself. They'd also recorded Elena's behavior when she thought she was unobserved, revealing the person behind the professional mask she wore around me, in footage from my home office. We watched Elena searching through my personal files, photographing documents with her phone, and even testing different keys on my safe. She'd been gathering intelligence about my finances and estate planning for months, clearly preparing for the aftermath of my death. The cameras in the kitchen revealed another disturbing pattern. Elena had been experimenting with my food as well as my medication, adding small amounts of what appeared to be the same substance she'd been substituting for my heart pills. She'd been covering all possible vectors for the poison, ensuring that, even if I missed doses of my medication, I'd still be receiving arsenic through other means. Most chilling was footage from just 3 weeks ago, around the time my symptoms had become severe enough to warrant the doctor's visit that had saved my life. Elena was shown in my bedroom, standing over my bed while I slept, holding what appeared to be a syringe. She'd stood there for nearly 5 minutes, as if debating whether to take more direct action. She was losing patience, Morrison observed. The slow poisoning wasn't working fast enough for her timeline. Look at her body language. Hear this as someone considering murder in the first degree. The footage also captured Elena's reaction to my increasing illness. While she'd expressed concern and care when speaking with me directly, the cameras revealed her true emotions when she thought she was alone. We watched her smile with satisfaction after particularly severe episodes, check her watch as if monitoring progress, and even make phone calls where her body language suggested she was reporting updates to someone else. Morrison had also discovered that Elena had been disabling certain cameras periodically, claiming they needed maintenance or had technical issues. The timing of these blackouts corresponded exactly with occasions when my symptoms had been most severe, suggesting she'd been taking more aggressive action during these surveillance gaps. She's been playing a long game, Morrison explained, but she's also been adapting her strategy based on results. The footage shows her becoming more desperate and reckless as financial pressure increased. That desperation is what led to the mistakes that exposed her. The security system had also captured audio, and Elena's private phone conversations were particularly revealing. We'd recorded her speaking to her gambling debt contacts, promising payment within the month and assuring them that her current project would resolve all financial issues permanently. Even more damaging were recordings of Elena practicing conversations about my death. She'd rehearsed discovering my body, calling emergency services, and speaking with police investigators. She'd prepared responses to potential questions about my health, my medications, and our professional relationship. The woman had literally practiced being a grieving employee who'd lost her beloved employer to mysterious health complications. As I watched months of footage showing Elena systematically planning and executing my murder, I felt something I'd never experienced before, the cold certainty that someone had to pay for what they'd done. This wasn't just attempted murder. It was a calculated campaign of deception and betrayal that had lasted for years. Elena had used my own security system to document her crimes, never imagining that the cameras she'd grown accustomed to would eventually become the evidence that destroyed her. The impact of Elena's poisoning campaign extended far beyond my personal health. It was systematically destroying the business empire I'd spent decades building. As I reviewed company records and meeting minutes from the past 18 months, I realized how my declining cognitive function had nearly cost me everything. Sterling Capital Management wasn't just my livelihood. It was a $2.8 billion investment firm managing portfolios for pension funds, university endowments, and high-net-worth individuals across 3 continents. My reputation for sharp analysis and decisive action was the foundation of client trust. But as arsenic accumulated in my system, that reputation had begun to crumble. The merger with Hartfield Industries should have been my crowning achievement. $400 million deal that would have positioned us as the dominant player in renewable energy investments. Instead, my increasingly erratic behavior during negotiations had nearly destroyed the opportunity. I'd forgotten key details during presentations, made calculation errors that my junior associates had to correct, and worst of all, I'd appeared confused and disoriented during the final negotiation session. Marcus seemed off. Read an email from Hartfield's CEO that my business partner had forwarded to me. We're concerned about his health and whether he's capable of managing the integration process. Perhaps we should postpone until he's feeling better. Elena had been present during most of these crucial meetings, taking notes and managing my schedule. I now realized she'd been documenting my cognitive decline with the same clinical detachment she'd shown in her personal observations. But more disturbing was how she'd begun positioning herself as an intermediary between me and my own company. Mr. Sterling is feeling under the weather today, she'd told my senior partners on multiple occasions. Perhaps I can handle the client calls and brief him later when he's more focused. Elena had gradually inserted herself into business communications, claiming she was protecting me from stress while I dealt with health issues. She'd rescheduled important meetings, delayed critical decisions, and even drafted emails on my behalf. My own employees had begun treating her as my proxy, seeking her approval for actions that should have required my direct involvement. The board of directors had noticed Morrison's investigation had uncovered private communications between board members expressing concern about my declining performance and discussing potential succession planning. They'd been preparing for my incapacitation or death, exactly as Elena had intended. Most alarmingly, Elena had been using her access to company information for her own purposes. Security footage from my office showed her photographing confidential documents, copying client lists, and accessing financial projections that were far beyond her authorized clearance level. She'd been building a comprehensive picture of my business operations, presumably to better understand the full value of what she planned to inherit. Elena had also been manipulating my business relationships in subtle ways. She'd forgotten to pass along messages from potential investors, delayed scheduling meetings with key clients, and even provided incorrect information that had cost us several lucrative opportunities. At the time, I'd attributed these problems to my own deteriorating focus, never suspecting that my assistant was sabotaging my company while poisoning me. The financial impact was staggering. My firm had lost approximately $60 million in potential revenue over the past year due to missed opportunities, delayed decisions, and client defections. Several major clients had moved their portfolios to competitors, citing concerns about my inconsistent performance and apparent health issues. But Elena's interference went deeper than just business operations. She'd been systematically isolating me from my professional network, using my health as an excuse to decline social events, industry conferences, and informal meetings where important business relationships were maintained. She'd convinced me that I needed to focus on getting better, rather than maintaining the personal connections that were crucial to my success. She was creating a narrative, Morrison explained as we reviewed Elena's actions. If you died, she wanted everyone to remember you as someone whose health had been declining, whose business judgment had become questionable. It would make your death seem like a natural progression rather than a shocking event. The succession plan Elena had been researching was particularly revealing. She'd accessed documents showing how my company would be managed in the event of my death or incapacitation. The plan called for my senior partners to assume control temporarily while my estate was settled. But Elena had been positioning herself as someone who understood my wishes and could provide guidance during the transition. I realized that Elena's long-term plan wasn't just to inherit my personal fortune. She intended to maintain influence over my business empire as well. The forged will that left her $150 million would have given her significant leverage with my successors, potentially allowing her to extract even more money from my company's operations. As I calculated the full scope of what Elena had cost me, not just the attempted murder, but the systematic destruction of relationships, opportunities, and reputation, my anger crystallized into something far more dangerous. She hadn't just tried to kill Marcus Sterling, the person. She'd been killing Marcus Sterling, the businessman, the innovator, the force that had built something meaningful from nothing. Elena had attacked everything I'd worked for, believing she could destroy my life's work and profit from the wreckage. It was time to show her that some enemies are too dangerous to leave standing. ***, the medical records. Dr. Richardson painted a horrifying picture of systematic poisoning that had been slowly destroying my body for over 18 months. As we sat in his office reviewing the comprehensive analysis he'd prepared, I felt a mixture of rage and gratitude. Rage at what had been done to me, and gratitude that I had survived long enough to fight back. The arsenic levels in your system were approaching lethal concentrations, Dr. Richardson explained, pointing to a chart that tracked my blood work over time. A few more weeks of exposure at the current rate, and we'd be having a very different conversation. The records showed a clear timeline of Elena's escalating dosages. She'd started with amounts small enough to cause fatigue and mild confusion symptoms that could easily be attributed to stress or aging. But as her financial desperation increased, so had the arsenic concentrations. The recent spike in dosage corresponded exactly with Morrison's findings about her mounting gambling debts and approaching deadlines. Look at this pattern, Dr. Richardson continued, showing me lab results from the past 6 months. The poisoning wasn't random. Someone was carefully calibrating the doses to maximize damage while avoiding immediate detection. This required considerable research and planning. The physical toll had been more severe than I'd realized. The arsenic had damaged my liver, affected my kidney function, and caused neurological symptoms that would have become irreversible with continued exposure. My memory problems, the tremors in my hands, the chronic fatigue, all of it was the result of Elena's careful campaign to destroy my body from the inside out. The good news is that you're young and healthy enough to recover completely, Dr. Richardson assured me. Arsenic poisoning is reversible if caught in time. But Marcus, if you'd waited another month to seek treatment, the damage might have been permanent. The hospital records also documented something else important. The progression of my symptoms had accelerated dramatically in recent weeks. Elena had been running out of patience, increasing both the frequency and concentration of her poisoning. In a desperate attempt to finish me off before her creditors took action, Dr. Richardson had also discovered something that made my blood run cold. Elena had been researching my medical history extensively. asking detailed questions about my heart condition, my family history of cardiac problems, and the specific medications I was taking. She'd positioned herself as my primary caregiver, convincing my doctor that she was monitoring my health on his behalf. She called my office at least twice a week, Dr. Richardson revealed, always with questions about your medications, your symptoms, or your treatment plan. I thought she was being exceptionally attentive to your care. Now I realized she was gathering information to make the poisoning more effective. Elena had even suggested specific tests and treatments that, in retrospect, would have masked the signs of arsenic poisoning. She'd recommended supplements that would have interfered with accurate blood work, and she'd pushed for medications that would have explained away some of my symptoms as side effects rather than poisoning. The most disturbing revelation was how Elena had manipulated my medical appointments. She'd scheduled them during periods when my symptoms were most severe, creating a documented pattern of declining health that would support her narrative of natural deterioration. She'd also been present during most appointments, subtly guiding conversations and influencing Dr. Richardson's assessments. She was very knowledgeable about your condition, Dr. Richardson admitted. She could discuss your symptoms in medical terminology, describe the progression of your health issues with remarkable accuracy, and even suggest potential treatments. I was impressed by her dedication to your well-being. The irony was staggering. Elena's extensive research into arsenic poisoning had made her appear to be an exceptionally caring assistant, when, in reality, she was using that knowledge to perfect my murder. She'd turned my own doctor into an unwitting accomplice by convincing him that she was monitoring my health when she was actually monitoring the effectiveness of her poison. Dr. Richardson had also uncovered something that proved Elena's timeline was accelerating. Recent blood work showed that she'd changed the type of arsenic she was using, switching to a more potent compound that would have killed me much faster. The change corresponded with Morrison's discovery of her increasing financial pressure and suggests she'd decided to end the slow poisoning in favor of a more direct approach. Based on the recent changes in your blood chemistry, I estimate you had maybe 2 weeks left, Dr. Richardson said quietly. Whatever this person was planning, they were preparing for the final stage. As we reviewed the medical evidence of Elena's systematic attempt to murder me, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just about catching a criminal anymore. It was about stopping a predator who'd spent years perfecting her technique on my body. Every headache, every moment of confusion, every symptom I'd attributed to stress had been a deliberate attack on my life. But Elena had made one crucial error. In her medical manipulation, in her eagerness to appear knowledgeable and caring, she'd documented her own involvement extensively. Every phone call to Dr. Richardson, every question about my treatment, every suggestion about my care had created a paper trail that proved her intimate knowledge of my condition. The woman who'd been playing doctor with my life had just provided the medical evidence that would convict her of attempted murder. Morrison's expanded investigation into Elena's background revealed a pattern so chilling that it transformed my case from attempted murder to serial killing. The private investigator had connected with law enforcement agencies across 4 states, and what they'd discovered made Elena Vasquez one of the most dangerous predators I'd ever encountered. She's done this before, Morrison said, spreading files across my desk like a prosecutor presenting evidence. At least 3 times that we can prove, possibly more. Elena Dosen Vasquez has been targeting wealthy, isolated individuals for over a decade. The first case dated back 8 years, to Phoenix, Arizona. Margaret Whitfield, a 72-year-old worth $40 million, had died from complications related to her diabetes medication. Her personal assistant, Elena Martinez, had inherited $2 million and disappeared shortly after the funeral. The death had been ruled natural causes, but Margaret's nephew had suspected foul play and hired investigators who found discrepancies in her medical records. The nephew couldn't prove anything, Morrison explained, but he found evidence that Elena had been lying about her background, just like she did with you. Different name, different references, same pattern of gaining complete access to her employer's life before the mysterious health decline began. The second case was even more damning. Robert Chen, a tech entrepreneur in Seattle worth $60 million, had died from a heart attack at age 45. His assistant, Elena Rodriguez, had been named in his will as receiving $5 million for her exceptional loyalty. She'd vanished within weeks of his death, leaving no forwarding address. Chen's business partner told police that Robert had been experiencing strange symptoms for months before his death. Morrison read from police reports. Fatigue, confusion, memory problems, sound familiar? But Elena had convinced everyone that Robert was just stressed from work pressure. The third case was the most recent and most relevant to my situation. Thomas Brennan, a real estate mogul in Houston worth $100 million, had died 18 months ago from what appeared to be complications from his heart medication. His assistant, Elena Santos, had inherited $8 million and immediately moved to Las Vegas, where she'd apparently developed the gambling addiction that had led her to me. This is where it gets interesting, Morrison said, producing bank records and casino surveillance photos. Elena blew through Brennan's inheritance in less than a year. high-stakes poker, blackjack, sports betting. She lost everything and then some. That's when she started looking for her next target. The pattern was clear and terrifying. Elena wasn't just a greedy assistant who'd decided to kill her employer. She was a serial killer who specialized in targeting wealthy individuals, gaining their complete trust, and then murdering them for their money. Each case showed the same methodical approach: extensive background research, gradual integration into the victim's life, systematic poisoning, and carefully planned inheritance claims. Morrison had also discovered that Elena had been in contact with other individuals who matched her victim profile. She'd applied for assistant positions with at least 6 other wealthy executives over the past 2 years, suggesting she'd been shopping for the perfect target when she'd found me. "You weren't random," Marcus Morrison explained. "She specifically sought you out because you fit her requirements perfectly: wealthy, isolated, no close family, heavily dependent on personal assistance. You were exactly what she was looking for." The investigation had also revealed Elena's criminal network. She'd been working with forgers, identity specialists, and even a corrupt insurance agent who'd helped her establish the fraudulent life insurance policy. This wasn't a solo operation. It was an organized criminal enterprise specializing in inheritance fraud through murder. "The good news is that we've identified most of her accomplices," Morrison said. "The bad news is that Elena is the only one who can testify about the full scope of their operations. If she disappears or dies, the entire network goes free." But Morrison had saved the most important discovery for last. Through his law enforcement contacts, he'd learned that Elena was being investigated by the FBI as part of a broader task force targeting inheritance fraud. They'd been building a case against her for months, but they'd been waiting for more evidence before making arrests. "They want to coordinate with us," Morrison explained. "Your case could be the key to taking down the entire operation, but it means we need to be very careful about how we proceed. Elena can't know we're onto her until we're ready to spring the trap." The FBI involvement changed everything. This wasn't just about getting justice for what Elena had done to me. It was about stopping a serial killer who would continue targeting wealthy individuals until she was caught. Every day Elena remained free was another day she could be selecting her next victim, beginning another campaign of systematic murder. Morrison had also discovered Elena's immediate plans. Financial pressure from her gambling debts meant she couldn't afford to continue the slow poisoning much longer. Her creditors were demanding payment within 2 weeks, which meant she was planning to accelerate my death dramatically. We were literally racing against a deadline she'd set for my murder. "She's going to make her move soon," Morrison warned. "Our sources suggest she's been researching more direct methods, probably planning to stage an accident or medical emergency that would finish the job quickly." As I reviewed the evidence of Elena's previous murders and her plans for mine, I felt something I'd never experienced before: that absolute certainty that I was dealing with pure evil. This wasn't a desperate woman who'd made a terrible choice. This was a predator who'd made murder her profession. But Elena had made one crucial error in choosing me as her target. Unlike her previous victims, I'd discovered her plan before she could complete it, and unlike her previous victims, I had the resources and connections to fight back with overwhelming force. The woman who'd been hunting wealthy individuals for a decade was about to learn what happened when she targeted someone who could hunt her back. The psychological profile Dr. Sarah Chen compiled on Elena was more disturbing than any evidence we'd collected so far. As a forensic psychiatrist who specialized in analyzing serial offenders, Dr. Chen had reviewed all of Morrison's findings and reached conclusions that made my blood run cold. "Elena exhibits classic traits of a psychopathic predator," Dr. Chen explained during our consultation. "She's highly intelligent, manipulative, and completely lacking in empathy. But what makes her particularly dangerous is her ability to maintain long-term deceptions while appearing genuinely caring to her victims." The recorded conversations Morrison had captured revealed Elena's true personality when she thought she was unobserved. The caring, devoted assistant disappeared, replaced by someone who spoke about my deteriorating health with clinical detachment and occasional satisfaction. She'd discussed my symptoms with her gambling contacts, as if reporting progress on a business project. "Listen to this," Dr. Chen said, playing back one of Elena's phone conversations. "She's describing your latest episode of confusion with obvious pleasure. There's no concern, no worry, just satisfaction that her plan is working. This isn't someone who feels guilty about what she's doing. She's enjoying it." The psychological analysis also revealed how Elena had been manipulating my emotions and decisions over the years. She'd used classic gaslighting techniques, making me doubt my own perceptions while positioning herself as the only reliable source of information about my life. When I'd questioned inconsistencies in my health or memory, Elena had provided alternative explanations that made me feel foolish. "For being suspicious, she's been conducting psychological warfare against you," Dr. Chen explained. "Every interaction was designed to increase your dependence on her, while undermining your confidence in your own judgment. It's a form of mental torture that makes the victim complicit in their own destruction." Elena had also been studying my psychological triggers with the same methodical approach she'd used for the poisoning. She'd learned exactly how to praise my business decisions to make me feel valued, how to express concern about my health without seeming intrusive, and how to position herself as indispensable without appearing ambitious. The recordings revealed another disturbing pattern. Elena had been practicing conversations about my death. We'd captured audio of her rehearsing phone calls to emergency services, preparing statements for police interviews, and even practicing expressions of grief and shock. She'd been preparing to perform the role of the devastated assistant who'd lost her beloved employer. This level of preparation indicates a complete absence of normal human emotion, Dr. Chen observed. Most people couldn't plan someone's murder with this level of detail without experiencing significant psychological distress. Elena shows no signs of conflict, guilt, or hesitation. But the psychological profile revealed something else. Confidence in her abilities had made her careless. She'd become so convinced of her own superiority that she'd stopped being cautious about hiding her true nature. The recent recordings showed her becoming increasingly bold in her conversations, expressing contempt for her previous victims and confidence that she'd never be caught. Dr. Chen had also identified Elena's psychological vulnerabilities. Despite her apparent confidence, the recordings revealed deep insecurities about her intelligence and social status. She'd made disparaging comments about her victims' stupidity and their weakness, suggesting that she needed to feel superior to justify her actions. She sees herself as smarter than everyone around her, Dr. Chen explained. That narcissism is both her strength and her weakness. It allows her to manipulate people effectively, but it also makes her overconfident and prone to mistakes. The analysis also revealed Elena's relationship with risk and control. She'd structured each murder to minimize her personal exposure while maximizing her psychological dominance over the victim. The slow poisoning wasn't just about avoiding detection, it was about exercising power, watching her victims deteriorate gradually while knowing she was responsible. Most importantly, Dr. Chen had identified Elena's breaking point. The financial pressure and timeline constraints were forcing her to act against her preferred methodical approach. She was being pushed toward more direct action, which would make her more dangerous but also more likely to make critical errors. She's losing control of the situation, Dr. Chen observed. The careful predator is being replaced by a desperate gambler. That desperation will make her unpredictable, but it will also make her vulnerable. The psychological warfare Elena had been conducting against me was about to be turned back on her. Dr. Chen had provided me with specific techniques for manipulating Elena's responses, exploiting her psychological weaknesses, and drawing her into making the mistakes that would expose her completely. She's spent years studying you, Dr. Chen said with a slight smile. Now it's your turn to study her. And unlike Elena, you'll be using that knowledge to save lives rather than destroy them. As I listened to hours of recordings that revealed Elena's true nature, I realized I'd been living with a monster who'd been slowly destroying me while I thanked her for her dedication. But now that I understood her psychological profile, I had the tools to turn her own manipulative techniques against her. The woman who'd been playing psychological games with my mind was about to discover that she'd chosen the wrong opponent. For her final game, the plan Dr. Chen and Morrison helped me devise was elegantly to give Elena exactly what she wanted to see while secretly documenting everything she did in response. We would accelerate my apparent decline, making her believe her poisoning was finally achieving its intended effect, while recording every moment of her reaction to my supposed deteriorating condition. The key is to make her feel like she's winning, Dr. Chen explained as we finalized the strategy. Elena's psychological profile suggests she become overconfident and careless. If she believes her plan is succeeding ahead of schedule, that confidence will lead her to take risks that will expose her completely. Morrison had installed additional surveillance equipment throughout my home, including microcameras and audio recording devices that would capture Elena's behavior when she thought she was unobserved. We'd also arranged for FBI agents to monitor from a nearby location, ready to intervene if Elena attempted anything that posed immediate danger to my life. The fake medical report Dr. Chen created was a masterpiece of psychological manipulation. It showed my blood work indicating rapid deterioration, suggesting that my heart condition had taken a sudden turn for the worse, and that I had perhaps days or weeks to live. The report recommended immediate hospitalization, but we planned to have me refuse treatment, creating the perfect scenario for Elena to believe she could finish her work quickly. Elena will interpret your refusal to seek aggressive treatment as an opportunity, Dr. Chen predicted. She'll see it as a chance to accelerate your death without anyone questioning the natural progression of your illness. The morning I put our plan into action, I made sure to appear visibly weaker than usual. I stumbled slightly when walking, complained of chest pains, and asked Elena to cancel my afternoon meetings because I was feeling unusually tired. Her reaction was everything we'd hoped for and more. "Oh my goodness, Marcus, you look terrible," Elena said. her voice filled with perfectly performed concern. But the hidden cameras captured something else entirely, a flash of excitement in her eyes, a barely suppressed smile that revealed her true feelings about my apparent decline. When I showed her the fake medical report that afternoon, Elena's performance was awesome. She expressed shock, insisted that I seek immediate treatment, and offered to drive me to the hospital herself. But the audio recordings captured her making a phone call within minutes of leaving my office. "It's happening faster than expected," she whispered into her phone. "Maybe a week, possibly less. I need to accelerate the timeline." That evening, Elena's behavior changed dramatically. She became even more attentive than usual, insisting on preparing all my meals personally and staying late to make sure I was comfortable. But the surveillance cameras revealed her true activity. She was adding larger quantities of what we now knew was arsenic to everything I consumed, believing she was delivering the final doses that would kill me. What Elena didn't know was that I'd stopped eating anything she prepared days earlier. Morrison had arranged for a private chef to provide all my meals, while Elena's food was collected as evidence of her escalating murder attempts. Each poisoned meal was another nail in her legal coffin. The psychological aspect of the trap was working perfectly. Elena's confidence in her imminent success made her increasingly bold in her conversations and behavior. She'd begun making subtle inquiries about my funeral preferences, suggesting that we update certain legal documents while I was still mentally clear, and even commenting on how peaceful I looked when she thought I was resting. "She's already planning your memorial service," Morrison reported after reviewing the day's surveillance footage. "The cameras caught her researching funeral homes and cemetery plots. She's also been looking at real estate in countries with limited extradition treaties." But Elena's growing excitement also made her sloppy. She'd begun leaving evidence of her poisoning more carelessly, apparently believing that my imminent death would eliminate any possibility of investigation. She'd stopped being cautious about camera angles when handling my medication, and her phone conversations had become more explicit about her timeline and methods. The trap reached its culmination when Elena volunteered to stay overnight to monitor my condition during what she believed might be my final days. She moved into the guest bedroom, positioning herself to observe my supposed deterioration while having immediate access to accelerate my death if necessary. "This is perfect," Dr. Chen observed as we reviewed Elena's behavior patterns. "She's isolated herself in your home with comprehensive surveillance coverage. Every action she takes now will be documented, and she can't claim she was anywhere else when the evidence shows her attempting murder." The FBI team monitoring the situation was impressed by how completely Elena had incriminated herself. Her eagerness to be present for my death, combined with her obvious satisfaction at my apparent suffering, had created an overwhelming case for premeditated murder. "We have enough evidence to convict her 10 times over," the lead FBI agent told me during a secure call, "but we want to catch her in the act of attempting to administer what she believes will be the final dose. That will give us the strongest possible case and eliminate any possibility of her claiming innocence." As Elena settled into her overnight vigil, believing she was witnessing the successful conclusion of her 5-year murder plan, I felt a grim satisfaction. The woman who'd been setting a trap for me for half a decade had just walked into a trap of my own design. Tomorrow morning, Elena would attempt to deliver what she believed would be my final dose of poison. Instead, she would be delivering herself directly into the hands of federal agents who'd been waiting years for the chance to stop her killing spree. The morning of the confrontation, Elena entered my bedroom with what she believed would be my final dose of heart medication. The hidden cameras captured every detail as she approached my bed with a silver tray containing pills that were more arsenic than medicine, her face showing barely concealed anticipation of my impending death. "Good morning, Marcus," she said, softly, her voice filled with false concern. "I've prepared your medications. Dr. Richardson wants you to take an extra dose today given how you're feeling." I sat up slowly, playing the role of a dying man struggling with his final moments. "Elena, I need to tell you something important." Her eyes sharpened with interest. Perhaps she expected a deathbed confession, or maybe instructions about my estate. What she got instead was something she'd never anticipated. "I know what you've been doing." The change in Elena's expression was instantaneous and captured in perfect detail by the surveillance cameras. The mask of concern vanished, replaced by a calculating coldness that revealed her true nature. For the first time in 5 years, I was seeing the real Elena Vasquez. "I don't know what you mean," she said carefully, but her body language had already shifted into defensive mode. I reached into my nightstand and pulled out a folder containing copies of all the evidence Morrison had compiled. Photos of her forged credentials, financial records showing her gambling debts, surveillance footage of her tampering with my medication, and medical reports proving systematic arsenic poisoning. "Elena Vasquez," I said, using her real name for the first time, also known as Elena Martinez, Elena Rodriguez, and Elena Santos. Serial killer, murderer of Margaret Whitfield, Robert Chen, and Thomas Brennan, and the woman who's been slowly poisoning me for 18 months. Elena's reaction was fascinating to watch. Rather than denying the accusations or attempting to flee, she became perfectly still, her mind clearly racing through options and calculations. She was evaluating whether she could still salvage her plan or if she needed to cut her losses. "How long have you known?" she asked finally, her voice now completely devoid of the caring assistant persona she'd maintained for years. "Long enough to document everything," I replied. "Every pill you've substituted, every conversation you've had about my death, every step of your plan to murder me and steal my fortune." Elena set down the medication tray and moved closer to my bed, her demeanor now openly threatening. "You can't prove anything. It's your word against mine, and you've been acting erratically for months. Everyone knows your health has been declining." "That's where you're wrong," I said, gesturing toward the various hidden cameras throughout the room. "Everything has been recorded. Every poisoning attempt, every fake expression of concern, every conversation you thought was private. The FBI has been watching you for weeks." The mention of federal involvement finally broke Elena's composure. Her face contorted with rage as she realized the full scope of how completely she'd been outmaneuvered. "You bastard," she snarled. Do you have any idea what you've cost me? I spent 5 years setting this up, 5 years earning your trust, 5 years planning every detail. You were supposed to die quietly and gratefully, thanking me for my service. Like Margaret Whitfield did, like Robert Chen and Thomas Brennan. I asked, "How many people have you murdered, Elena? How many families have you destroyed for money?" Elena. Anger transformed into something even more chilling. She began describing her previous kills with the detached professionalism of someone discussing business achievements. "They were all pathetically easy," she said. "Lonely, isolated people who were desperate for someone to care about them. All I had to do was be indispensable, gain their trust, and then help them die peacefully. They never suspected a thing." The cameras were capturing every word of her confession, but Elena was too far gone to care about consequences anymore. Years of successful manipulation and murder had created a narcissistic confidence that made her want to boast about her achievements. "You should have been the crowning achievement," she continued. $220 million would have set me up for life. But instead, you had to be clever. You had to figure it out before I finished the job." "The job is finished, Elena," I said quietly, "just not the way you planned." That's when she lunged for the medication tray, grabbing what I assumed was a backup weapon, or perhaps a concentrated dose of poison she'd planned to force down my throat. But before she could reach me, the bedroom door burst open and FBI agents flooded into the room. "Elena Boscus, you're under arrest for attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and multiple counts of homicide," the lead agent announced, as Elena was forced to the ground and handcuffed. Even as the agents restrained her, Elena continued to stare at me with pure hatred. "This isn't over, Marcus. You think you've won, but there are others like me. Others who know how easy it is to kill wealthy, arrogant men who think they're untouchable." "Maybe," I replied as the agents prepared to remove her from my home forever. "But they'll never be as stupid as you were. Elena, you got greedy, you got careless, and you got caught." As Elena was dragged away, still screaming threats and accusations, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: complete safety in my own home. The woman who'd been planning my death for 5 years was finally facing justice for her crimes. But more than that, I felt satisfaction knowing that Elena's arrest would prevent her from targeting other victims. The serial killer who'd made murder her profession had just been permanently retired from the business of death. Elena's arrest made national headlines within hours. The FBI's press conference revealed the full scope of her crimes, describing a serial killer who'd spent over a decade targeting wealthy individuals across multiple states. The arrest warrant charged her with 4 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud, and identity theft that carried the possibility of life imprisonment without parole. The media frenzy was immediate and overwhelming. "Personal assistant of death," read the New York Times headline. "Billionaire exposes serial killer," proclaimed the Wall Street Journal. My phone rang constantly with interview requests from news programs, documentary filmmakers, and true crime podcasters wanting to tell the story of how I'd survived Elena's murder plot. But the real satisfaction came from learning about the broader impact of Elena's arrest. The FBI's investigation had uncovered evidence linking her to at least 6 additional suspicious deaths over the past 15 years. Each case followed the same pattern: a wealthy, isolated individual who'd hired Elena as a personal assistant and subsequently died under mysterious circumstances after changing their will to benefit her. Detective Sarah Martinez, the lead investigator on Elena's case, briefed me on the full scope of what they'd discovered. "Your case was the key that unlocked everything," she explained. "The evidence you and Morrison compiled gave us the proof we needed to connect Elena to murders across 4 different states. Without your investigation, she might have continued killing indefinitely." The financial investigation revealed the staggering scope of Elena's criminal enterprise. Over 15 years, she'd stolen approximately $50 million from her victims through forged wills, fraudulent insurance claims, and direct theft. The money had been laundered through a network of shell companies and offshore accounts, requiring international cooperation to trace and recover. Elena's gambling addiction had consumed most of her ill-gotten gains, but investigators found evidence of luxury purchases, real estate investments, and significant cash payments to accomplices who'd helped her create false identities and forged documents. The entire criminal network was being dismantled piece by piece. The legal proceedings moved swiftly. Elena's attorneys attempted to negotiate a plea bargain, offering to provide information about unsolved cases in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. But the evidence against her was so overwhelming that prosecutors felt confident taking the case to trial, where they could seek maximum penalties for her crimes. The preliminary hearings revealed additional disturbing details about Elena's methods. Forensic accountants testified about her systematic financial planning, showing how she'd researched each victim's net worth and estate planning before targeting them. Medical experts explained her poisoning techniques, describing how she'd calibrated arsenic doses to maximize suffering while avoiding immediate detection. Most damaging was the psychological evaluation, performed by court-appointed psychiatrists. They concluded that Elena showed no remorse for her actions and would likely continue killing if given the opportunity. Their report described her as a textbook psychopath with predatory instincts and a complete absence of empathy for human suffering. The victim impact statements were heartbreaking. Family members of Elena's previous victims described their confusion and grief over losing loved ones to what they'd believed were natural deaths. They spoke about years of unanswered questions, suspicious circumstances that had never been properly investigated, and the relief of finally knowing the truth about their relatives' deaths. Margaret Whitfield's nephew broke down while describing how his aunt had changed her will just weeks before her death, leaving millions to the only person who truly cared about her well-being. Robert Chen's business partner testified about his friend's declining health and increasing dependence on Elena's care in the months before his sudden heart attack. The insurance companies Elena had defrauded were also seeking restitution. She'd collected nearly $20 million in fraudulent life insurance claims over the years, money that would need to be repaid to settle civil lawsuits. The financial penalties alone would ensure that Elena could never profit from her crimes, even if she somehow avoided life imprisonment. But perhaps the most significant aspect of Elena's arrest was its impact on preventing future crimes. The FBI had created a task force to investigate similar cases involving personal assistants and caregivers who'd inherited substantial amounts from employers who'd died under suspicious circumstances. Elena's case had provided a template for identifying and stopping other predators who used similar methods. As I watched the news coverage of Elena's arrest and the broader investigation it had triggered, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The woman who'd tried to murder me had inadvertently exposed an entire criminal enterprise and prevented countless future victims from suffering the same fate as her previous targets. Elena Vasquez had spent 15 years perfecting the art of murder for profit, but in targeting Marcus Sterling, she'd finally chosen a victim who refused to die quietly. Instead of adding me to her list of successful kills, she'd given law enforcement the evidence they needed to end her killing spree permanently. The predator, who'd made a career out of death, was about to spend the rest of her life paying for the lives she'd destroyed. The trial began 6 months after Elena's arrest, and the courtroom was packed with victims' families, media representatives, and law enforcement officials who'd worked on the case. Elena sat at the defendant's table wearing a conservative navy suit, her appearance carefully crafted to project innocence and professionalism. But I could see the calculating coldness in her eyes that I'd missed for so many years. Taking the witness stand was one of the most difficult things I'd ever done. As I raised my right hand to swear to tell the truth, I looked directly at Elena and saw no trace of remorse or regret. She stared back at me with the same predatory focus I'd unknowingly lived with for 5 years. "Mr. Sterling," the prosecutor began, "please tell the court how you first met the defendant." I described Elena's flawless interview, her exceptional qualifications, and how quickly she'd become indispensable to my daily life. The jury listened intently as I explained how Elena had gradually gained access to every aspect of my personal and professional existence, positioning herself as my primary caregiver and trusted confidant. "When did you first realize something was wrong?" the prosecutor asked. "When Dr. Richardson called to tell me I was being poisoned with arsenic," I replied. Until that moment, I trusted Elena completely. She was the person I relied on most in the world, and she was systematically murdering me. The prosecutor introduced evidence, methodically surveillance footage showing Elena tampering with my medication, financial records proving her mounting debts and gambling addiction, forged documents revealing her criminal history, and audio recordings capturing her discussing my death with obvious satisfaction. The most powerful evidence was Elena's own confession, recorded during our final confrontation. The jury watched in stunned silence as Elena boasted about her previous murders, describing her victims as pathetically easy targets who'd trusted her completely. They never suspected a thing. Elena's voice echoed through the courtroom, lonely, isolated people who were desperate for someone to care about them. Elena's defense attorney tried desperately to create reasonable doubt, arguing that Elena had been coerced into her confession and that the evidence against her was circumstantial. But the overwhelming documentation of her crimes made their job nearly impossible. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the defense attorney argued. My client may have made poor financial decisions, but that doesn't make her a murderer, Mr. Stern. Illness could have been caused by environmental factors, stress, or any number of medical conditions. The prosecution's rebuttal was devastating. They presented testimony from medical experts who explained exactly how arsenic poisoning worked. Forensic accountants who traced Elena's criminal enterprise across multiple states, and family members of her previous victims who described identical patterns of behavior. Dr. Richardson's testimony was particularly damaging to Elena's defense. He explained how Elena had manipulated my medical care, positioning herself as my primary caregiver while secretly monitoring the effectiveness of her poisoning. Her extensive medical knowledge, which she'd used to appear caring and competent, was revealed as evidence of premeditation. The defendant demonstrated sophisticated understanding of arsenic poisoning, Dr. Richardson testified. She knew exactly how to calibrate doses to maximize damage while avoiding immediate detection. This wasn't accidental poisoning, attempted murder by someone with extensive knowledge of toxicology. The families of Elena's previous victims provided heart-wrenching testimony about their loved ones' final months. They described how Elena had isolated their relatives from friends and family, convinced them to change their wills, and appeared devastated by deaths she'd actually orchestrated. Margaret Whitfield's nephew testified about his aunt's sudden decision to leave millions to her assistant. Aunt Margaret had always been very careful with money, he explained. She'd planned to leave her fortune to charity. Then Elena convinced her that family members were just waiting for her to die so they could inherit her wealth. Robert Chen's business partner described how Elena had gradually taken control of Robert's medical care, convincing him that his family didn't understand his health problems but that she was dedicated to helping him recover. She isolated him completely, he testified. By the end, Elena was the only person Robert trusted. The prosecution also introduced evidence of Elena's criminal network. They showed how she'd worked with document forgers, identity specialists, and corrupt insurance agents to create the infrastructure necessary for her killing spree. Each accomplice, who testified, provided additional evidence of Elena's guilt and the premeditated nature of her crimes. When Elena took the stand in her own defense, her testimony backfired spectacularly. Under cross-examination, her carefully practiced expressions of innocence cracked, revealing glimpses of the predatory personality she'd hidden for so long. Isn't it true, Ms. Vasquez, that you specifically targeted wealthy, isolated individuals? The prosecutor asked. I worked for people who needed assistance, Elena replied, but her voice carried an edge of contempt that the jury clearly noticed. And isn't it true that each of your employers died under mysterious circumstances after naming you in their wills? Elena's attorney objected, but the damage was done. Elena's defensive responses and barely concealed anger made it clear that she felt no genuine remorse for her actions. The closing arguments were powerful on both sides, but the evidence spoke for itself. The prosecutor's summation was devastating. Elena Vasquez is a serial killer who made murder her profession. She targeted vulnerable people, gained their trust, and then killed them for money. The only reason Marcus Sterling is alive to testify today is because she made the mistake of targeting someone smart enough and resourceful enough to stop her. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood and delivered verdicts that would ensure Elena would never hurt anyone again. Guilty on all counts of first-degree murder. Guilty of attempted murder, guilty of conspiracy, fraud, and identity theft. As the verdicts were read, Elena showed no emotion. She sat perfectly still, staring straight ahead as if she were calculating her next move. But there would be no next move. Elena Vasquez's career as a serial killer was over. ***, 6 months after Elena's conviction, I sat in Dr. Richardson's office receiving what I had waited nearly 2 years to hear, a completely clean bill of health. The arsenic had been completely eliminated from my system, my liver function had returned to normal, and the neurological symptoms that had plagued me for so long were gone. You've made a remarkable recovery, Dr. Richardson said, reviewing my latest test results. There's no permanent damage from the poisoning. Physically, you're in better shape now than you were before Elena started targeting you. The physical recovery had been the easy part. My body had proven resilient enough to repair the damage Elena had inflicted over 18 months of systematic poisoning, but the psychological healing had been far more complex and ongoing. Living with the knowledge that someone I'd trusted completely had been planning my death for 5 years had shattered my ability to trust others. Every new person I met, every employee who worked in my home, every professional who provided services, I found myself analyzing their motives and looking for signs of deception. Dr. Chen had warned me that this hypervigilance was a normal response to prolonged betrayal trauma. Your brain learned that trusting someone completely could be fatal, she explained during one of our therapy sessions. It's going to take time to recalibrate your threat assessment systems. The business empire that had nearly crumbled during my poisoning had not only recovered, but expanded significantly. Once my cognitive function returned to normal, I'd been able to complete the Hartfield Industries merger and secure several major new client accounts. My reputation in the investment community had actually been enhanced by the story of how I'd exposed Elena's crimes. Investors like working with someone who's proven they can handle extreme adversity. My business partner had observed the fact that you figured out Elena's plan and stopped her shows, the kind of analytical thinking our clients want in their money managers, but I'd implemented significant changes to protect myself and my business from future threats. Every employee now underwent extensive background checks conducted by multiple independent agencies. All household staff were rotated regularly, preventing anyone from developing the kind of comprehensive access Elena had enjoyed. I'd also completely restructured my personal security arrangements. No single person was allowed to handle my medications, my food preparation, or my schedule management. Multiple people shared these responsibilities, with cross-checks and oversight systems that would make it virtually impossible for anyone to manipulate my life the way Elena had. The legal proceedings had finally concluded with Elena receiving 4 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. She'd also been ordered to pay millions in restitution to her victims' families, though recovering the money would be a long and complex process given how much she'd hidden in offshore accounts. More importantly, Elena's conviction had led to legislative changes in several states. New laws required background checks for personal care workers, mandatory reporting systems for suspicious deaths involving inheritance beneficiaries, and enhanced oversight of life insurance policies taken out by employers on behalf of assistants. The Elena Vasquez case had also inspired a new FBI task force dedicated to investigating inheritance fraud and predatory caregivers. Law enforcement agencies across the country were now trained to recognize the warning signs of the crimes Elena had perfected, potentially saving countless future victims. On a personal level, I'd discovered strengths I hadn't known I possessed. The methodical investigation that had exposed Elena's crimes had required a level of strategic thinking and emotional control that I'd never tested before. Facing a serial killer who'd been manipulating my life for years had shown me that I could handle truly extreme challenges. I'd also developed a deeper appreciation for genuine relationships. The few people who'd remained loyal during my investigation, Morrison, Dr. Richardson, Dr. Chun, had proven themselves in ways that ordinary circumstances never could have tested. These relationships had become more valuable to me than any business success or financial achievement. The media attention surrounding Elena's case had gradually faded, but I still received occasional interview requests from journalists, documentary filmmakers, and academic researchers studying predatory behavior. I'd become selective about which stories I participated in, focusing on those that might help prevent similar crimes or assist other victims of financial creditors. Looking back on the 5 years I'd unknowingly lived with a serial killer, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Anger at Elena's betrayal remained, but it was balanced by satisfaction at having stopped her before she could claim more victims. The experience had changed me fundamentally, making me more cautious but also more confident in my ability to handle whatever challenges might arise. Perhaps most importantly, I'd learned to distinguish between healthy caution and paralyzing paranoia. While I would never again be as trusting as I'd been with Elena, I refused to let her crimes turn me into someone who couldn't form meaningful relationships or take reasonable risks. Today, 2 years after Elena's conviction, I signed a new employment contract with my current assistant, David Chun, Dr. Chun's younger brother, and a former FBI analyst who'd been vetted more thoroughly than most federal appointees. The contract was vastly different from the document I'd signed with Elena 5 years earlier, reflecting everything I'd learned about protecting myself from predatory employees. The new security protocols were comprehensive but not paranoid. Responsibilities were clearly defined and limited, with built-in oversight systems and regular rotation of sensitive duties. No single person would ever again have the kind of comprehensive access to my life that Elena had enjoyed. I know this seems excessive, I told David as we reviewed the security procedures, but experience has taught me that thorough precautions are worth the inconvenience. David, who'd studied Elena's case extensively during his FBI training, understood completely. Actually, Mr. Sterling, I'm impressed by how reasonable these measures are. Given what Elena put you through, you could have justified much more restrictive protocols. The past 2 years had been transformative in ways I hadn't expected. The experience of surviving a serial killer's murder plot had given me a unique perspective that proved valuable both personally and professionally. I'd become involved with several organizations dedicated to preventing elder abuse and financial exploitation, using my story to educate potential victims about warning signs. My investment firm had also expanded into security consulting, helping other high-net-worth individuals protect themselves from the kinds of threats Elena represented. We'd developed comprehensive screening procedures for household staff, security assessments for personal protection, and even psychological evaluations to help clients identify potentially manipulative employees. The Elena Vasquez case changed how wealthy individuals think about personal security, Morrison had observed during a recent consultation. People used to worry about external threats, burglars, kidnappers, extortionists. Now they understand that the biggest dangers often come from the people they trust most. I'd also found an unexpected sense of purpose in helping other victims of similar crimes. Through the Victims Advocacy Group I'd counseled dozens of people who'd discovered that trusted caregivers, assistants, or family members had been exploiting or endangering them. Many found it helpful to speak with someone who'd survived a similar betrayal. The financial impact of Elena's crimes had been largely reversed through insurance claims and asset recovery efforts. But more importantly, the business skills that had helped me expose her plot had also enabled me to expand my company significantly. Sterling Capital Management now managed over $4 billion in assets, making it one of the most successful boutique investment firms in the country. Personal relationships remained challenging but were slowly improving. I'd started dating someone I'd met through the Victims Advocacy Group, a fellow survivor, who understood the complexities of rebuilding trust after betrayal. Our relationship was progressing carefully but steadily, built on mutual understanding of how precious, genuine, trust really was. The irony is that Elena thought she was destroying your life. Dr. Chen had observed during one of our final therapy sessions, but in many ways, exposing her crimes led to a stronger, more authentic version of yourself. She was right. The man who'd been so focused on business success that he'd ignored obvious warning signs had been replaced by someone who understood the importance of genuine relationships, personal security, and helping others. I'd learned to balance professional achievement with personal well-being in ways I'd never considered before. Elena's betrayal. The legislative changes inspired by Elena's case continued to expand. 3 more states had passed laws requiring background checks for personal care workers, and federal legislation was being considered to create national databases for tracking suspicious deaths involving inheritance beneficiaries. Elena's crimes had created a legacy of protection for future potential victims. The FBI task force investigating similar cases had identified and stopped 12 other predatory caregivers using techniques developed from Elena's case. Each arrest represented lives saved and families protected from the devastation Elena had inflicted on her victims. As I looked back on the 5 years I'd unknowingly shared my life with a serial killer, I felt something I hadn't expected: gratitude, not for Elena's crimes, but for surviving them and having the opportunity to prevent others from suffering similar fates. The experience had been horrific, but it had also revealed strengths I'd never known I possessed and purposes I'd never considered pursuing. Elena Vasquez had spent years planning to destroy Marcus Sterling and claim his fortune. Instead, she'd created a stronger, wiser, more purposeful version of the man she'd tried to kill. Her greatest failure wasn't just getting caught, it was making her intended victim into someone dedicated to stopping others like her. The woman who'd thought she was writing my obituary had instead authored the beginning of a new chapter, one dedicated to protecting the innocent and ensuring that predators like Elena would never again find it easy to turn trust into a weapon of murder. In the end, Elena had taught me something invaluable: the difference between being cautious and being paranoid, between protecting yourself and isolating yourself, between learning from betrayal and being destroyed by it. Those lessons were worth more than the $220 million she'd planned to steal. They were worth the life she'd failed to take.